Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific vehicle review on Gran Turismo Sport, and this time we're talking about a car which I discussed even before the game came out, when we were breaking down the E3 trailer, because that was the first time that I'm aware of that we knew that this car was going to be in the game, the Volkswagen Beetle Group 3 race car. This immediately stood out to me from the trailer. In fact, it was probably my most anticipated car from the trailer, and then the second one would probably be the Group 3 Peugeot RCZ, because I love those oddball choices. To me, that has always been something that both Gran Turismo and Forza has done very well. They've featured these weird left field choices which you wouldn't assume would be in the game, but they're always really nice surprises. You can probably think of some. For Forza, it would be stuff like the Seat Cupra GT, the Chrysler ME412, and a variety of others, the Hennessy Viper for instance. In Gran Turismo, you've got the Renault Espace F1, the original motor car, the Benz patent motor wagon, the Jay Leno tank car, those kind of really weird but definitely wonderful choices to give the game some variety. Because when a game goes for those less obvious choices, to me at least, it keeps it interesting. Because you go into a game, a racing game of course, expecting certain things. You expect your Ferraris and a few Audis and a few Mercs and a few Fords. It's these ones which capture the attention of people like me personally, and I'm sure for a wider group of people in general. Granted, a Beetle isn't exactly synonymous with excitement, generally speaking, but the Beetle is a great canvas to work from as a performance car. Even in the real world, my personal favourite version of the Beetle is the RSI, and that car is a monster. It's one of the most exclusive hot hatches ever made, and it's a seriously quick car. I'm actually surprised that Volkswagen even produced any of those. It seems like the kind of car that would just be a one-off concept, so I love the fact that they actually went out and did that. However, this car takes that concept to the next level, because of course there is no road-going version in the game. Or actually, there might be. I'm saying that. There have been some road-going versions of others, like the Corvette C7 and the Group B Mitsubishi Evo, so that might be interesting to see if there is a road-going version of this one. But for now, at least, as far as I'm aware, we don't have one. But what does this car offer? Because it could swing either way. A Beetle could either be really good or really boring, because it's a good car to work with, but it depends what polyphony chooses to do with it. Because, of course, this is not a real car, it is one of those Group 3 machines that is a polyphony digital original. Now, in terms of price, just like all of the other Group 3 machines, it costs a cool 450 grand, which is actually pretty good if you think about it. That's a lot cheaper than many of the GT cars on older Gran Turismo games have been. Now, what do you get for that? Well, the engine size is unknown. Who really cares in the case of a Beetle, though? You get a pretty impressive 591 horsepower, which is quite a lot, actually. It's also got 437 pound-feet of torque, and it only weighs 1,200 kilos to begin with, which means that overall, the specs on this Beetle are, ironically, some of the best in the Group 3 category. That's a pretty good start for this car. You're running almost 500 horsepower per tonne straight off the bat, and so overall, when it comes to weight or power or torque, this is a strong all-rounder, at least on paper. The question is, though, can it translate that into actual performance? And especially when it comes to cornering ability, because this is pretty much the only oddball choice of Group 3 car in the game, at least that I can think of. All of the others are pretty much already exotics. Stuff like the Alfa 4C, the BMW M6, the Mercedes AMG GT or the SLS, the Nissan GT-R. They are, for the most part, very obvious choices, and even when you get to something like a Peugeot RCZ, that is, after all, already a sports coupe in a similar way to an Audi TT Quattro, or something like a Mazda 6, which might be the nearest to this one in terms of how oddball it is, at least off the top of my head. Even then, that does have kind of a DTM style to it, so even then that's not that strange a choice. With a Beetle, on the other hand, that's not necessarily a guarantee of being a good performance car, even if it does have good numbers. So, how does it perform? Well, I'm glad to say it performs really well. This car is an excellent Group 3 machine, and I've seen some comments and heard some comments on YouTube already from people who are actually saying that this is one of the most OP Group 3 cars in the game, which is pretty cool to hear. I haven't raced online at all yet, shock horror, I know, but in career mode, when I have used this car, it has been competitive. I've never lost with it so far against the computer, so it definitely has that kind of potential. In terms of the way it drives, well, the fact that the centre of gravity is a little bit higher on this one, with the roofline of, say, a hatchback for instance, rather than a full-on coupe or a sports car, it does carry its weight a little bit higher, but the fact that the weight is so low anyway means that it doesn't feel like a cumbersome car. In fact, it doesn't even feel anything like what you'd assume a Beetle would feel like. It's excellent through corners, and the centre of gravity is actually held quite low, so the car feels very purposeful and very aggressive through corners. It's very squat and has a very wide track, which makes it feel a lot better than easily could. Now, of course, that goes for a lot of cars that have wide body kits and wider tracks in the Group 3 category, but with a Beetle, I think the advantage is you just notice it more, because you know what a Beetle would usually be like, even though the normal version of this car isn't on the game, and you can compare that to what this one feels like. With another car, say something like a Huracan or a 458 or an SLS, well, the road versions are fairly predictable. You know what you're going to get. And the race cars basically just take that essential ability and take it to the next level, turn up the notch a little bit. With the Beetle, that's not really the case. It's a total overhaul, and really it's a Beetle only in name. Not much is actually still Beetle underneath. So overall, this is definitely a Group 3 machine that I would recommend trying out. It is kind of getting a reputation now for being a very good car, so it doesn't really have the full-on sleeper appeal that it would have had initially on the game, but still, even if it doesn't have the sleeper appeal, it's still cool to be able to have a really fast Beetle, and in effect, for those nostalgic, old-school Gran Turismo fans such as myself who started years and years ago, it's actually quite nice to go back, in one sense, to Gran Turismo 2 in that way, because Gran Turismo 2 is actually the last time that we had a Beetle that was truly crazy fast, because we had an RSI on that game which was called the Beetle LM, and it had the all-wheel drive of the road version, but in the packaging of the Beetle Cup car with 420 horsepower. That is basically the fastest that the Beetle ever was as standard in the world of Gran Turismo. So this is a nice little homage to those days. So overall, definitely a car that's worth checking out, and of course, I'll see you guys next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.